PI of ESRC Data Policy Review and professor at the University of Dundee, and Maeve Malone, lecturer in law at the University of Dundee, who will share with us summary of the ESRC findings. And I'll stop talking and I'll let you to share your screen and
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me okay and see my screen share as well. I'm actually going to turn off my camera because I think I don't have a great connection at the moment. So thanks for joining us, and thanks very much to the organisers for inviting us. I'm Angela Daly, and with my colleague Maeve Malone, we are going to present an overview of the review of the ESRC research data policy that we've been conducting over the last 9 months and concluded just last week, in fact. And Maeve has shared a link to the report that we released last week in the chat. I'm going to give a general overview of the work, and then Maeve is going to focus on parts of the work that involved data management plans specifically. Okay, so the background to this is the Economic and Social Research Council, one of the publicly funded research councils in the United Kingdom, has had a research data policy for some time, since the 1990s, we actually think. But the current version of the policy originates from 10 years ago and was lightly updated in 2018. The main thrust of the policy is that if you have a grant from the ESRC, which is UK-based researchers in economics and social sciences, if you create data as a part of that grant, you are supposed to deposit that data with the UK Data Service or another approved repository, and ideally that data is made freely available, although there are some exceptions and restrictions to this, as I'm sure you can imagine, for things like privacy protection and confidentiality reasons, particularly when the grants involve data that has originated with the UK government or one of the devolved nation governments, such as Scottish Government, and also data which has come from commercial sources. In this requirement to deposit data, we see a dual purpose to it. On the one hand, facilitating the reproducibility and replicability of research, and on the other hand, also ensuring that publicly funded research data in the social sciences in the UK is accessible to others as a public good. Since the policy was last properly and thoroughly updated in 2014, which is now 10 years ago, there's clearly been many changes to the kinds of data and data practices in the social sciences, as well as other disciplines as well. Various laws and policies which have come in, such as the GDPR, but also particularly in the UK case, of course, the rupture with the EU in the form of Brexit, and various other developments. So it seemed kind of a good time to rethink the policy and see whether it's still fit for purpose. So to that end, the ESRC commissioned my team and I to conduct an independent review of the policy, which started in August of last year and concluded just earlier this month. As part of this review, we conducted a scoping exercise to understand the landscape for this policy, particularly in the UK, it has to be said. That is a limitation of our work. And we also conducted 3 kinds of new empirical research, which included a survey of UK-based stakeholders, including researchers, research support staff, and other interested parties in October and November of last year. That was then supplemented by 4 focus groups with the same groups of UK stakeholders in November to December, and also an analysis of data management plans that Maeve will talk more about later. And as I mentioned, the final report just came out last week, so this is pretty hot off the press. There are a number of challenges to conducting this work, and I'll just mention 3 of them here. The ESRC covers a very wide variety of social science disciplines. Anyone who works in the social sciences, and I'm also socio-legal researcher, that is my main area. So I view myself as someone in the social sciences very much. I know from my own experience and interacting with people from economics or sociology or political science, etc., linguistics, that there are very, very different kinds of disciplines, very different kinds of data methods and approaches that exist in those disciplines. So the ESRC and its data policy is intended to try and cover all this variety. And as a result, it's hard to devise unitary policy, which the policy is for all of these kinds of disciplines, data, methods. Okay, so skipping to findings from our report, and as mentioned, Maeve is going to come back and talk about DMP analysis and findings and recommendations in more detail after this. But to continue to give you the overview, our respondents firstly generally found that the policy is still useful to have, and we didn't have, an overwhelming, in fact, nobody actually said we should get rid of it. So despite various issues that respondents had with it, they still viewed it as useful and generally quite successful as well. And the requirement of data deposit as a default was also viewed as very positively, in fact, and some viewed the ESRC to actually be quite a leading research funding council, both in the UK and to some extent internationally as well, through this approach to data deposit. And also relevant to our discussion here, people found data management plans to be a useful tool for research data management and planning. There was a need to recognise how diverse and varied social science data is across methods and disciplines, as I've already pointed out. And this is related to issues with uncertainty that were expressed by our participants around how the research community can best produce open research data, and an under-acknowledgement of data that cannot be made fully open for reasons that I've already touched on: confidentiality, privacy, and so on. So respondents wanted this kind of or these kinds of data to be better acknowledged in the current policy. And also another important point that was raised was insufficient financial support and resource for preparing data for sharing at the end of grants. We have a number of recommendations, 19 in total, and they are across a number of key themes. So the first one being aims and guiding principles for an updated research data policy. The second being means for implementation. Third, scope for alignment of policies across the ESRC and other UKRI councils, both in terms of the topic of research data, but also alignment with other policies such as around equality, diversity and inclusion and net zero, for example. And we conclude with some points which we consider require further work and consideration by the ESRC. In terms of some specific recommendations, we recommended that the data deposit by default requirement was retained, while acknowledging that not all data can be deposited and made fully open, but also it's not an open closed binary for data, that there's kind of tiers of sensitivity, a spectrum of openness and secureness, which needs to be better acknowledged in the policy. An important recommendation given this audience was the retention of data management plans and the expansion of them beyond a move that ESRC has made from having a data management plan document of, let's say, 3 pages of A4 long to a 500-word text box, which is accompanying the move from a very previous and quite old-fashioned grant application and management system to a new system called the funding service. So as part of that move, it was proposed that there would only be 500 words for data management planning in the context of the applications, and there was a huge amount of against that move, and so our recommendation was that data management plans should actually be retained as they are, and they should be longer, or at least the possibility of having a longer one than 500 words was also key. We've also recommended that DMPs become living documents, building on DMPonline, and Maeve will talk more about that in a second. Other recommendations to involve, for instance, commissioning cross-disciplinary research into ethical and legal aspects of combining data sets, and also, funnily enough, a consultation on what data actually is for the purposes of the ESRC research data policy, as well as data-related artefacts, and to what extent and how should data-related artefacts such as software code be deposited, if at all. Also, we have recommended maximum coherence among different policies for different research, that kinds of data or methods that council its own, for example. Has to do
Angela, I think you might have cut out there. Angela, you are muted.
Sorry, yeah, Maeve, it's over to you in any case.
Over to me. Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Angela, and thanks very much for having us to present our work to you this afternoon. It's very timely, I suppose, in terms of the work that we have just conducted. And just to echo what Angela has said, just in her last point there, the team that was involved in this project came from a couple of different backgrounds, but not necessarily from a more computer coding, software, machine learning background. But interestingly enough, at the same time, the Sustainability Institute was working on that aspect of it. So in tandem with these two reports, it's quite a robust piece of work that has been presented to one of the funders in the UK. So I think that's really important to mention here in the context of the ESRC, the Economic, Social and Research Council, and you can access the link from the chat there. But just to understand, I suppose, the framework of the different funders, and I think this was mentioned by Tomas and a few other people earlier on in the session, to say that actually it's quite a complex, can be quite a complex thing to deal with, the funders, and so the UKRI, I guess, is at the top and trying to work through all of these. So you've got lots of funders that fund medical research, social science research, economic research, and so this was part of what we were trying to achieve, trying to pull out some information from this empirical research from the community, the research communities themselves. So as part of my input into this, I was involved in one particular aspect of it, in the legal part of it also, because I'm the director of the Healthcare Law and Ethics programme at the University of Dundee, and also have intellectual property background. So I was very interested in that chat there an hour or two ago, and might say something about that at the end. So in terms of DMP recommendations, it'd be great if we could move to the next slide, please, Angela, if possible. Thank you. So in terms of the DMP recommendations, what we did, there were two stages. There was stage 1 and 2. So we had a light touch review initially. It was a very fast project. It moved from August, just completed there last week in terms of the report. But as you can all appreciate, we had to collect data and put it all together very quickly. So in terms of the data management plan analysis, we did stage 1 and 2. We did a light touch, and bearing in mind that our remit, as you can see from the report, was very much UK focused. I wanted to kind of see what was happening on the international stage as well, to see how we could bring that analysis to the ESRC, it being an independent report. And I think that it was deeper as a result of that. So we had a look at a select number of openly available templates, and some of them were ranging from the Avon longitudinal study of parents and children, for example, was one very particular one that is available online, but other ones from different DMP, obviously, collection, and also from, for example, the DMP tool from Science Europe, from the International Alignment of Research, Irish Research Council. So a couple of ones that we looked at where we were able to see, okay, well, what is the structure of these DMPs and how can we look at it? Stage 2 then moved much more deep, and we got access on a confidential and de-identified basis to completed DMPs. So this was a step much deeper than the templates that we had looked at. And so these were provided to us by the ESRC, but we also got access to some from, on the same basis, confidential and de-identified basis, from our own research institution, the University of Dundee. Now, most of these, all of these, in fact, templates were created using the very useful Digital Curation Centre DMPonline tool. And so what we did as part of that was we had to have a look and extract the information to try to see whether we could map these onto the principles of the existing ESRC research data policy. So if you want to have a look at, I suppose, the most important pages in terms of DMP analysis, in the link in the chat will be page 13 and 29 of this, so that you can kind of follow me if you're interested. But what we did was we mapped each component of these completed DMPs onto the principles of the policy. And we came up with a couple of findings. Angela has already mentioned a few of these to you, but obviously the diversity and variety of the social sciences disciplines and data comprised within these DMPs obviously threw up a lot of difficulties and problems that we, I suppose, were able to look at in the context of bringing ourselves up and out of the principles, up and out of the structure of the DMP, and we're then able to find alignments and kind of similarities between this, regardless of the funder, regardless of the data itself, and found that there were a lot of similar problems and issues that were cropping up across these, some of these interdisciplinary templates that we're dealing with data across different disciplines. So again, just echoing Angela, the 2 to 3 pages was common and adequate. So there was a change, quite timely change, from the GES system to the UK funding service system. And at that time, there was a very drastic change down to a 500-word DMP, which all of you, I presume, in the room now will consider way too short. So what we found was that 2 to 3 pages was common and adequate, with some more details having a lot of repetition, I guess, in them if they were of the longer pages and not necessarily as pinpointed as they probably could. Some of the shorter ones then didn't contain enough nuanced detail either to adequately address the complexities of a DMP. So if we move to the next slide, Angela, I think we've just got one more slide left to share, and these are a recommendation slide. Quite a lot of information on this slide, but hopefully it is ringing true with a lot of what we've heard today from a lot of the presenters, and thank you, I've also learned from you all too. So we are recommending in our recommendation number 7 that DMPs should be retained and reworked. So the specific detail then, we're talking about a living DMP process, and that's feeding back into the Goldacre report that was published recently enough in the UK, that was calling for this life cycle, looking for a DMP to not just be a one-hit wonder, I suppose, but to be a living process, that somebody would interact with it again and again and make sure that people know there's a record and a cycle, a living process that can be recorded and found. So, but also when at these trigger points, so we're recommending that there would be a trigger point for when this living DMP process should be revisited. And we've identified 3, not exhaustive, but 3 important ones. So say, for example, when the research or data collection deviates from the original plan, or for example, in a 5-year project, perhaps when data must be made available for peer review in terms of publication, or also in terms of, and this comes from some of the research that I've also provided a link for, that Angela and I were involved in a recent, another project, and it's to do with something that was brought to our awareness quite clearly by the research community in the trusted research environments work that we have done. And this was a difficulty in terms of when a purpose for the research might change mid-project. So this is what we're calling for. This might be a trigger point in terms of updating the DMP. We should also promote it to researchers, management staff and research organisations to make sure that people understand what's expected. It should be facilitated also by easily and accessible online software. And this is where we're tying back into the earlier research that was presented. And also, so we're talking about machine actionable DMPs, bringing that to their attention, and also the Research Data Alliance DMP Common Standard. Again, that the word amount should be extended, and then having an enhanced interoperability between the funding service and DMPonline or another tool prompted by questions with guidance. So really interesting to hear those 35 questions that were potentially dropped down from an earlier speaker today. So that's the kind of thing that we foresee in these recommendations too. So I think we're finished on these particular slides, and if anybody has any questions for us, we're more than happy to take any questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maeve, and thank you, Angela, very much for your presentation. I can't see any questions in the chat, but I'll invite now the room to ask you any questions now, if you wish. But unless there are not any more questions, we can smoothly just continue with the last talk of the day, which will be a wrap-up by my colleague Diana Sisu.
Hi, very quickly, I was going to have Maeve, you said you had something to add about questions raised in the AI slide?
Yes, I suppose just briefly, because somebody was shouting out for a lawyer in the room, and Angela very adeptly jumped in. And I suppose I've just been thinking about it just a little bit, and I do have obviously knowledge of working with in inventions, patent law, copyright. And what I was just thinking of doing was putting just one or two little links into the chat that some people might find interesting. Some people may have heard of Stephen Thaler and the number of I'm just going to put it into the chat now, but the number of court cases that have been instituted by him across the world. One of the most recent ones, the most important one in terms of patent protection and whether or not an inventor can be listed, whether or not an AI can be listed as the inventor in an application to be named as the inventor on an application form with, for example, the Intellectual Property Office of the United Kingdom. This was what was really interesting, and I've provided you there with some links directly to where you can go to find some more information. But this was just kind of tapping into the earlier chat in terms of ChatGPT and whether or not there is an answer. Well, the law and the courts are coming out strongly, in particular in relation to the US Copyright Office. So I know that was a copyright question that was posed earlier. So the United States Intellectual Property Copyright Office is coming out very strongly. So even if you did a very quick search of their main landing page, you'll find some really interesting things there in terms of Stephen Thaler again, and looking for whether or not he can, the creator of a very interesting recent entrance to Paradise, which was a beautiful picture that was created by an AI tool. And again, this was pushed by Stephen Thaler. So very interesting kind of pushes there. And the last thing that I'm going to end on, I guess, is you've all heard of John Grisham. You've all heard of Authors Guild, for example. So a huge case has been instituted in the District Court of Southern District of New York, for example. And those proceedings have been instituted against OpenAI, together with lots of different versions of OpenAI. So that's going to be a really interesting one to look on and to see whether or not they actually were able to manage to serve the proceedings on OpenAI, and how did that go about, were there waivers and all of that. So I hope that's kind of helpful. We're in a huge period of change. So all of these things are going to be really, really interesting and important to keep an eye on in the data management community internationally. So I hope that was helpful.
We do have a question from Rachel as well.
Rachel, do you want to read it out yourself, or?
Oh, hi there. Thanks very much for the presentation. It's really interesting and timely, I think, reviewing the DMP stuff. It was really a question about whether during your research, the policy from the ESRC allows researchers to effectively choose which research data repository they want to deposit their works with, as long as it's a sort of trusted and appropriate environment. Now, I work with an institutional repository dealing with data, and we working closely and with some challenge with legal and information governance issues around handling sensitive data. And it's really taking up quite a lot of our service sort of development. And as you can imagine, it's quite challenging in terms of the variety and sensitivity levels of data. So I just wondered whether either in your focus groups or just in your research, there was some kind of push to deposit specifically sensitive data with UKDS as opposed to institutional repositories, or whether it was a bit more agnostic than that, and whether as institutional repositories we need to be working towards handling sensitive data effectively. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll take this one. So there were, okay, I guess more, in short, I think more agnostic. That would be the answer to your question. There were complex and different views around institutional repositories versus some third-party platforms versus UKDS. And in the end, we have continued to, I guess, support the state, well, what we see as the status quo about deposit with UKDS or other appropriate repository, which would probably be one of the other ESRC investments, such as Urban Big Data Centre or CDRC, where that's appropriate, but essentially deposit with UKDS. We did, I'm just looking through the report now, we do have a recommendation on data deposit, and part of that recommendation is if researchers need to make data available before the end of their grants, they should do this via institutional repositories in preference to third-party platforms, because it's viewed that institutional access and maintenance of the data will be better enabled by that. I'm not sure if you agree with it, Rachel, or not, but there were issues raised around things like data protection issues with regards to third-party platforms. But then we had some researchers saying that they actually preferred third-party platforms because the data was more discoverable. So I'm not sure we really honestly came to a very clear conclusion on that. There were also discussions too about whether institutional repositories would outlast the UK data service, which people seem to think they would do. But as we see in the UK in the last few days, there are universities that might go bankrupt. So I don't think we very well addressed that point beyond just kind of saying supporting the status quo and suggesting that institutional repositories be used for data that might be made available before the end of the grant.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, which is basically what institutional repositories take at the minute. It's just what, and again, I'd be interested, perhaps other people might want to comment about the sort of proportion of more sensitive data. So I think when institutional repositories were set up, we probably did take in more kind of appropriate material that's appropriate for open sharing, you know, perhaps more STEM focused stuff. And then as we're taking in more social science and so forth and qualitative data, it's just causing quite a lot of a challenge. You know, it's a good thing, and we're developing our service, but perhaps if you're recommending that ESRC should put more money into this, we should be on the bids or something to develop the services to look after this stuff. Yeah, but thanks for the answer.
If I can just come back on that, I mean, but we have also, I should have given you a fuller answer to that aspect, was that, you know, we heard from a lot of people across researchers, research, data management and support staff and so on, about needing more guidance and support around for particular types of data or particular situations. And we have recommended that more of that is provided. I don't think we were extremely clear about exactly what that would be, because actually people were wanting a whole lot of different things. But I would see, for instance, some, if the community feels that this is needed, and I would agree from my own limited personal experience that probably is the case, then I think that there needs to be some kind of clearer guidance developed with relevant participants as well, as in people like yourselves.
Okay. Thank you very much.